everybody, Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with bassist, educator, Bass Musician Magazine contributor, Josh Needleman. Yay!
Hey, how's it going?
Great. Josh, we have so many exciting things to talk about. I know you've recently been playing with Buck Ford, and there's all kinds of exciting stuff, but as always, we like to go back to the very, very beginning. How did you get started in music and on bass?
Well, I started singing in the choir when I was 4, in the all-city choir. My mom pushed me up there to try out for that, and I made that, and we did the Muppets and stuff, and, we sang that, why are there so many songs about rainbows, and I just kind of had a knack for imitating. I could imitate things off the movies, and I could also imitate vocals and things like that. So, and I was back in the late 70s when there was still a lot of music in the school, so I had a lot of choices. And my neighbor was actually Peter Ferguson, who was Maynard Ferguson's nephew. So I was kind of interested in trying to try the trumpet, but I wasn't very good at it. I kind of just didn't have the knack for the trumpet. So, and that was in 2nd grade. And so we tried the cello, but I think that was more of the teacher's fault than anything. And she would teach me in a janitor's closet at lunch, and she just one day said, "You can't do this." So, and it was like a cello with the strings weren't even on it right. It was like a little small cello. I still remember that little dark closet and this mean old lady coming in and telling me I can't do it. So I went to the trombone because that had a little bit of a bigger thing.
Mouthpiece, yeah.
And they needed them I tended to always kind of fill needs. I was pretty easygoing, and that was 3rd grade. And so I played the trombone, and I just sort of faked it, and I practiced a little bit, but I could seem to never get a decent trombone that had the smooth. So I never really took to it, but I played it in school until I was about 11. My mom got me an acoustic guitar, a Yamaha acoustic guitar, not quite unlike the one I have for campfires now. And I also couldn't do that. My friend was a good guitarist, and he tried to teach me a chord, and I couldn't play a chord on it, and so I kind of put that aside. And then I was listening to people like Elton John and Billy Joel, Journey, things like that as a young preteen or tween. And I heard the Police. And then I started watching MTV, the 80s came, and I was like, oh wow, I could do that. I could do that. And so I got my mother had a friend at the time who had a Sears Roebuck bass. The strings are about that far off the neck, and it was like one of those tweed amps with an off-brand. But I immediately could play it, and I proceeded to just learn by ear all the Police, all the Police albums. Within 2 months, I joined a band, and we did a talent show, and we won the talent show.
Nice.
So I was like, wow, I kind of found something I can do. I can get around on this thing. And I was making up lines, little extra notes in there, too. I heard them in there already, like little doodle-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo.
Yeah.
I heard things like that in there. So I would just, by trial and error, find a little lick that worked, and I just played every time. But I didn't know any of the notes or anything. I just was all by ear. But I could read bass clef because of trombone. Then I heard my brother had a diamond needle and an awesome stereo. And I went upstairs and I heard do-do-do-do-do-do, I heard the middle of Tom Sawyer. And my jaw dropped. And I was like, what is that? And he's like, that's Rush, that's Geddy Lee. And I was like, holy crap. And then there was a great bass player in my jazz band at school, and I played trombone in the jazz band, and I said, do you know the middle of Tom Sawyer? And he played it perfectly on his Fender jazz bass, and I was like, whoa, nice. I'm going to do that. And so it was just from then on, I got a better bass, I got a Rickenbacker, I learned all the Rush, I saw Rush 25 times, I was just totally blown away by Rush. They spoke to me in a deep way, and I didn't even know that ethnically I had a similar background to Geddy Lee. But it was just kind of a resonance thing. They were 3 hours away from where I was, growing up.
Yeah.
And they say would come to my civic center, so they were coming right to me. And it was just, I kind of was always turned off by the really nerdy guys that wore their basses way up here. And arpeggio, and all that stuff. It was a little much for me. I was kind of a relaxed headed kid. I mean, I did well in school, but those kind of guys, they intimidated me a little bit, and all that fusion and stuff, and drummers would try to help me count it out. And I understood it and stuff, but still as a teenager, I wasn't quite ready to get into that. But at the same time, I also didn't like the guys that wore their basses down here.
Yeah, slung down low.
The Ramonesy type guys, and then nothing against it. But I noticed they had a lot of heart, and they had girls around them, and they played with open strings, and there was things that intrigued me. So I was intrigued by both of them, but I knew that wasn't for me, and I wanted to play my bass right here, just like Geddy. And so I thought Geddy Lee was the perfect role model for me because he was a singer like me, he played active bass like I did, and he wasn't too technical and he wasn't too loose. Like he had and like when that song Digital Man came out on Signals, just the way it was such a relaxed feel, but so many notes, and just the way they just hit something on that album, I think, that a lot of people overlook, a certain relaxed smoothness, and same with his vocals. There was a certain integration on that album, and so I was kind of coming into that right when, my bass playing was starting to mean something, and so that really helped me through those years. And like I said, I got a 2001 Rickenbacker, and I even got the Taurus pedals, Oh, wow. I didn't play a ton of Rush. We played 3 songs in my band. We had a female keyboard, it was called Axis. We had a female keyboard player, Liz Woodbury, who's active in the Northeast now as an educator and performer. And she actually went to school up in Washington.
Oh, nice.
I forget exactly where, but she got a degree in music up there. But she was keyboards, and so she would sing backups and do keyboards. And we had her drummer, Steve Medevere, who's also still very active in music. And then my buddy Tim O'Connor, who's just a brilliant natural lead guitarist. And we had a group called Axis, and I sang about half the songs, and Liz sang the other half. And we did stuff like Rush and Genesis, and and then more poppy stuff, Till Tuesday stuff, Walking on Sunshine, those kind of songs.
There you go.
But dances, we became the biggest group in the area, in our little area. We just were playing, and my mother would afford me a lesson. I had a single mom, and she would afford me a lesson occasionally, but I didn't get to have regular lessons. And I had a guitar teacher who taught bass for a while, and so he would sort of half show me the songs. But lucky I had a good ear, and I was really detail-oriented, so I'd pick up more. And then as I developed and high school was starting to come to an end, I had to decide what to do, and there was a guy named Carl DeSantis who owned a few restaurants around town, but he had been a musician and went to Berkeley, and he got me to learn all the notes on the bass. He just informally, I worked at a health club, and he went there, and he would say, okay, do you know where all your C's are today? Because I'd come up to him with my bass, and I'd say, what can you show me today? I was just eager to learn more, and I said, yeah, and I showed him all the C's on the bass, and he's like, okay, show me all the F's next week, and so I went through the cycle of force there, and that kind of became the basis of my teaching, memorizing the neck. I kind of consolidated that. Yeah, so that's kind of how it all started.
Got you. And so did you pursue any further studies after that, or are you pretty much self-taught?
No, absolutely. I'm mostly self-taught, but in college I looked for every opportunity to play that I could. I was the Contemporary Theater Society of Boston College's bassist. We did Jesus Christ Superstar, Hair, Godspell, and Evita. And some of that reading was really complicated. So I still was up to my same old tricks. I memorized the score, and then I reverse engineered it because you had to watch the score to know when to come in and come out. So I learned complicated reading by playing stuff I already knew and then seeing what it looked like.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how my reading came together. And then the BC Bach recruited me, so I was in the big band. And he actually the teacher still uses me to get people to come from the private schools to recruit to Boston College. Like he sends I think it's not a DVD anymore, but it was for a long time. It was a DVD.
Yeah. And
I was on there, and they say, "Oh, Josh Needleman's on there. Well, maybe I'll go to that school." So it helped them because I'm kind of well known around my area.
Gotcha.
So they would just kind of use me as a fishing lure, to get people to go to the school. But yeah, so I did that, and I was in a progressive rock trio, kind of like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, called Grand Design, with a kind of a controlling keyboard player, front guy. but I got a lot of distance out of that. We did got to do a lot of my bass style in there, and that was in a party band also. And then the key thing, the clincher that helped with my education was after college, I joined a group with 3 Berklee College of Music students that wanted to make a living. And we developed a whole wedding set, and we played everything from Glenn Miller to Led Zeppelin. And it was a quartet with a keyboard player, and he looked just like Mick Jagger, Ken Clark.
Oh, wow.
And he could sing just like him, but he played harmonica and keyboards too. And he would walk around like, also do Mick Jagger.
Wow.
And then the drummer was an engineer, and he could make incredible recordings just on cassette tapes. He could track and make them sound amazing, so we had this little isolated thing in Everett, Mass, across the water from Boston, and we all lived in this little house. Well, Ken lived in Cambridge, but the other 3 of us lived together, and Jim Cristaldi on guitar, and he was just one of those, your classic guitar kind of guy, and I guess he's a big producer now in Nashville. He was just so dedicated to the blues, and, he was your typical, like, guitar guy,
Mm-hmm.
And so they would criticize me, and they told me to put the metronome on 2 and 4 and work on my jazz blues. So through a winter I did that and put the metronome, on the offbeats and just played it in every key. And I just kept working and working. And then when I started teaching, which was about then, I started to attract students. They just started to come in. In fact, in college, I had some students. So actually before this, people would just come to my room and pay me a little money to teach them how to play the bass. I had some REM type guys, that wanted to get a little better, and they thought of me because they saw me with the theater society or whatever,
Sure.
and they wanted to learn. So I noticed that students were just coming my way naturally, and I enjoyed teaching and sharing the information. So I did that. And so when I started writing things out for students, that's when I became a really good reader.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next step to becoming a really good reader was transcribing walking bass lines. When I switched to the upright, well, not switched to, but when I added the upright in my early 20s, when I had the space, a wall to put it on, I got one because a lot of guys were asking for, do you play upright? Because I could play the jazz standards at this point, and they wanted that upright look and sound. And so I was like, sure, I'll get an upright, no problem. And I was like, oh no. After a few months, I'm like, I'm not an upright player, I'm an upright student.
Yeah.
That was scary. And so I went into classical music because that was the only way I could get it to be play in tune. I couldn't play Mary Had a Little Lamb in tune. So I spent the next 6 years deeply immersed in classical studies with symphony guys. With Charles Chandler and Shinji Ashima he's from the opera orchestra, and Charles is in the symphony, SF Symphony. I studied once a week with both of them, really serious. I'd drive to the city twice a week, and Shinji was in Sausalito, but I would I immersed myself, and to this day I continue to teach it and play it, and I just released the Swan earlier this year on my website. I'm working on the Bottesini Elegy. That's a really beautiful piece. I'm trying to just get the short pieces under my belt. At some point, I'd like to string one up with the solo strings. I really love the classical double bass stuff, And I do have a dream of having a double bass duo with a piano player where we play standards and classical solo double bass stuff, kind of. I think that could work kind of as a winery kind of thing. So it's something I'm thinking about doing. That's something that's on my list of things to hopefully do.
There you go. Well, and coming back to the educator portion of it, because you were teaching, and I know a lot of us will remember you as the author of Getting Around the Bass.
Yeah.
There you go. A lot of times teachers, when they look at what the materials they have to teach with, they'll go, well, this doesn't do this doesn't do this, and ipso facto, I need to write my own book. Is this the mother of invention behind Getting Around the Bass? Was it the need?
Precisely. So there was plenty of books to learn how to read notes. There's plenty of books on technique-specific things like slapping. Mm-hmm. I had good materials there. What I didn't have was good theory books with proper diagrams, technique books, and neck memorization books, and then how to put it all together. and what actual modes did you need, and the rules that were always broken within the theory. See, that was a problem for me in college, and I didn't tell you all of my education. I did take a lot of music theory classes too.
Nice.
Before and during and after college. And I could never, like, when I'd see chords that didn't fit together, I was like, how is this possible when the theory, and no one ever said that theory is meant to be broken. No one ever made me that cross. And it really was secondary dominance was the big issue. It was like using those dominant chords in untoured areas, areas that were not legal or whatever, legal. So like the blues, the 1 and 4 are not in the key that it says they're in, right? Only the 5 chord is in a straight standard blues. So I kind of made that a point in the book too, to discuss those secondary dominants, how they're used in major progressions, how they're used in minor progressions. And so I kind of loosened up that view of theory. I describe it as a neighborhood. So the neighborhood's got all the generic houses on it, but then you can say, I want a wraparound porch, and I want a pool, a kidney-shaped pool in the back. So the generic neighborhood would be the theory without any modifications, but then the modifications would be the typical additions people make to make chord progressions more interesting. Or maybe they don't use any theory at all. A lot of the writing I've done, there's just no theory involved in it at all. It's just kind of what I did, and it breaks every rule, So there's I try to discuss that a lot in my teaching. So in the book, that's a big portion of it is diagrams. And first I go over technique and memorize the neck, and then I get into the root fifth bass line, then triads, then pentatonics, then major scale harmony, minor scale harmony, modes, all that stuff. So I was taught it the other way around. Like I was taught, here's Locrian. I'm like, okay,
yeah,
Locrian.
And
sounds
so what?
Horrible.
Yeah.
I don't know what it means.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, teach, But I'll start with, here's a C, and here's the fifth of C, So especially with little kids, they can play a root fifth bass line pretty quick when they study with me, and a lot adults that are open-minded too, they get their education filled in as well. And then I don't believe in a lot of psychobabble about theory. I like to have it be under your hands as you go. So it's so it'll actually stick. So when I get guys that come in and they're probing me for a lot of mode knowledge and stuff, I go, I can sit here and talk to you about it, but it's not going to help your playing at all. We're better off if we study the major pentatonic and see how it relates to the minor pentatonic first, and how you see it's the same scale, and you understand the relative minor and major of that, and we corral you in each area of the bass, and then give you the whole neck, and then start to discuss that stuff. It'll make a lot more sense. So, some guys listen, and some guys I wind up talking to them. It all depends what they want to hear and what they want to do. So,
sure. Well,
and very flexible with the teaching.
Absolutely. And if you look at music, especially as it has been evolving with humanity, a lot of music they weren't thinking theory when they did it. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite areas is jazz. When you think of some of the old-timey ones, the ones like, the Monk, Coltrane, all of these, they weren't sitting down going, I'm going to do this in this fashion. It was kind of the free flow of the musicality, and a lot of the older tunes were never written, and they weren't even on paper, and so the musicians all had to just know them. And so I had the great opportunity to make acquaintance with Chuck Israels, and he used to play with Bill Evans' trio, and he's quite the character. He was at MIT, and he dropped out to play jazz. You can imagine how happy his parents were. And that's how he tells it. I'm like, yeah, But he was spending a lot of time transcribing the old tunes because nobody had written them, and he didn't want them to be lost. And
Archivist.
So you could kind of look at the whole circle of things and go, well, there's a lot that didn't have to do with the theory part, but understanding what's going on under the hood is helpful as well. So there's all kinds of benefits and so many approaches to education, but that's all fascinating. Moving along, we should talk a little bit about Buck Ford. Tell me about that gig.
Well, it's interesting how I came upon he's a modern day old time country singer with original songs. Okay, and he's 33, and you wouldn't, when you look at him, he doesn't look like the typical country singer either. He's, but he's got an incredible old time giant country voice. And what's interesting that led me to country was after I did this group Scribe for a long time. In addition to doing all the stuff we talked about, like with classical and jazz and all that, and playing for everybody as a sideman around here. And I had a group, a power trio. I was trying to do that power trio thing with a group called Scribe, and we have 13 songs on iTunes and all the different Spotify, all that. And it was really great progressive music, trio stuff that I did. And I just got tired of it at some point for a little while. I mean, I kind of like it again, but I did it for 20 years. Really, I pushed really hard, to try to make that happen. Just the timing wasn't right. I'm really proud of it. I really pulled off the Geddy Lee thing I wanted to do. I can do it now, and but it started to sound like video games to me. And around that time, I met David Grisman, the mandolin player. I became friends with him, and he played in his car. He played me some of the stuff he was working on. I'm like, that's huge sounding. I go, what are you doing? Are you doubling stuff? He's like, no, that's just acoustic music, 4 of us playing. And I'm like, wow, we tried so hard to get that big sound on my Scribe stuff. I want to try that. And so I wasn't quite good enough at stand-up bass yet at that point to be the stand-up bassist, but I had acquired some skills on guitar a little bit, from playing with my students so much. I had a 4-string guitar. And then I heard that Garcia Grisman stuff, the David Grisman, Jerry Garcia stuff.
Yeah.
I was like totally blown away by Jerry in that context. So I learned how to play that kind of guitar, and I started a group called the Pine Needles. So naturally I delved into old time music, and I started meeting some of these characters, and I met one guy named Morgan Kochner, who is a jug band aficionado, and he was working with Kenny Hall, this blind mandolin player, who's a lot like Doc Watson, but on a mandolin from Fresno, and he was archiving his songs and playing with him and making him teach them all to him and recording him and all stuff. So I got to hang around that, and I'm like, wow, this is the roots of jazz, speaking of what you were saying. So where, the Memphis Jug Band, things like that, that's what Miles and them are all coming out of. That was the early old-time music, and if you listen to the jazz progressions, that's what they are. They're sophisticated versions of those.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, these are just chord-based things, and I could tell that a lot of the bassists in early jazz and stuff were playing just off the cuff, playing chord tones and chromaticism. They didn't have the big picture of the modes and all that. And I find that to be the least important thing to this day. I think chord knowledge is the most important, and then chromaticism is second, and then scalular knowledge third.
Gotcha.
But anyway, getting back to the Buck Ford. So anyway, that kind of gave me a basis in country, and I did that for 20 years, and I played, I learned a lot of the Irish jigs and things like that, but I didn't have a bass gig, and I was like, this is weird. I'm like such a highly skilled electric bass player, and I have all these students, and it just doesn't seem right, but I didn't really feel like I didn't feel it to play with anybody until I heard Buck. And I was like, wow, he's really terrific. And so I approached him and I said, hey man, I'm a bassist, and I've learned a couple of your albums, and I put up a video on YouTube of one of your songs of me playing it, and I want to know I'm available if you need a bassist. And so he started calling me as a sub, and then I almost got the gig once, but then there was a little politics, but that didn't work out. Castles made of sand, and so now I'm the bassist. I've been the bassist for over 2 years, and we're going on a 3-nighter. After I get off here, I'll be leaving and heading out with Buck. He goes to Nashville and uses George Strait's band to do his recordings, so I'm not on the recordings, but our band is really tight, and the drummer does all the backup vocals, Aaron Smith, and we have Alex Chaney on the guitar, who's amazing, and Gary Broda on the pedal steel. We've been, Ronnie Elkin is our fiddler, who's in the Western Swing Hall of Fame. And it's just a terrific group. It's a 6-piece. Buck sings and plays acoustic guitar, and he books all the gigs, and he's got a Nashville booking agent. He's very much a DIY kind of guy, and and that's another reason I like working with him. He's really hardworking, and he's a stand-up guy, and he runs a paint business, his family's paint business during the week.
Wow.
And then he does all this music, and he's got a decent following. We we're only playing decent gigs now. We played a gig with Sarah Evans last couple weeks ago. That was pretty amazing. A fundraiser for the homeless out in Lodi on a ranch. It was really neat.
Fun.
It was about 800 guests.
Wow.
And we were set up opposite her, and right when she stopped, we started.
Very cool.
So that's how I got that gig, and that's what I'm doing right now. I would never have thought I'd be playing country, but I find it really interesting, and the bass has a really nice roll in it, and I got the right gear for it. So
excellent. Well, since you've mentioned gear, we should talk. How are you getting your sound? And I'm not going to just go by your T-shirt because I see the U-Bass logo.
That's another story. Yeah, and Mike Upton has been my student for many years on stand-up bass.
Nice.
And now when I do that pine needle stuff and play guitar, he plays the bass. And he gave me a U-Bass a long time ago. I just love it. And he endorses it's on my boat as well, my bass boat. Mm-hmm. We can talk about my bass fishing. But it says U-Bass on the side, and he helps with the payments on the boat. And we just have a great relationship. And so, and I have a U-Bass, and I love it. I have a little page on my website, in fact, where I play stuff purely acoustic. I haven't been attending to it as much, but the idea was to do one takes of bass lines on the U-Bass and with no microphone. I use the metal strings. I prefer the metal strings on it. But anyway, that's not what I use with Buck. Fender Precision Bass Special.
Okay.
But I never use the back pickup with Buck, the bridge pickup. I never use that. I just use the front all the way up, and the tone the tone open all the way, and I use Fender pure nickel strings, mediums. I like those. They came with those, and I called the factory and I said, what's the model number on those? And they gave me the model number of the plated nickel ones, and I'm like, these aren't it. I knew they weren't, and so I took them right off and I put on the pure nickel ones. They're a little bit more money. They're like $7 more. Those were the ones, and so I just want to stick with that because I really liked it to begin with. I got really lucky on the one I got. And then I used for my amp, Aguilar amplification. So the 212 XL is my cabinet. Super light, and it has 212s in it. I like 12s because the upper strings don't disappear. When I use 10s, if I don't EQ it perfectly I don't hear the upper, when I play a high riff, it's like almost like it disappeared if I play it softly. But the 212s really do the job, and they're super warm. And then the tone hammer, now I borrowed a 500, and I'd also gone to Dale Titus's house, who is the Aguilar rep of the West Coast. Mm-hmm. And I got to play the black one. I'm not sure what it's called, the one that's just solid state. I played that one, the 700, and then I played the Tone Hammer 700. I'm like, whoa, I want that one. So I got the Tone Hammer 700. It's like there's a big difference between the 5 and 7, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it is. I'm not sure if you've noticed that, but it's just has a lot more depth and variety to it. So that's pretty much what I use. I just use the Tone Hammer 700 and the Aguilar 212 XL.
Nice.
Cabinet. And it's pretty simple. I use an octave pedal from them as well. And I turn off the pure signal, and I just use the octave signal to avoid having to play 5-string. He has a lot of E-flat stuff.
Yeah.
So I hit it, and occasionally, maybe 5 times a night, I use it to get a low D or a low E-flat.
Excellent.
That's
Excellent. It. And because of the nature of the music, obviously with country, I think you'd want just as clean a sound as possible. You mentioned one pedal. Do you use much in the way of pedals otherwise?
Oh, no, I don't, and I don't use any overdrive or anything. I leave that to when I'm doing recordings and stuff. I play with a lot of plugins and things. I'm not a big pedal board guy. This is setting it up and all that, and just the things that can go wrong with it. I've always, every time I've used them, I've always kind of turned them off in the middle of the show because I feel like the bass tone is the warmth and the connection between my heart and my fingers doesn't get out as clear.
Yeah.
So I pretty much like a pure tone. I like a big, warm, puffy tone for country. I try to turn it up a little more and play a little softer. Mm-hmm. So I guess my standard setup is, bass on 1 o'clock, mids on 12, and treble on 3, something like that. And then from there, I tweak it.
Gotcha.
So I'll cut the mids if we're in a certain kind of room, or I'll cut the bass in certain rooms. Usually the treble just stays there, and I leave the tweeter all the way on. Even though I know it doesn't sound as good when you listen solo, I know that from experience that out there it adds to have some treble in there. So.
Got you. And would it be safe to guess that you like low action? Because what you're describing sounds... You talked about learning on the big Sears gap of strings, but...
Actually, I like pretty medium action, pretty
Okay.
high action, because I play upright and I get a better sound with a little higher action. So I don't like super low action. When I play really progressive stuff, I'd probably lower it a little bit more. If I were to rekindle my Scribe progressive rock stuff, I used to run it a little lower there. You know, but with this country stuff, there's only a few times I have to go really super fast, and I've got it worked out. So for the most part, I want to get that bigger tone. So, you know, there's always that balance between sustain and action. So it's like you get more tone with higher action, but it's harder to play. So
Yeah.
I like a medium action. I get it as low as I can get away with without a lot of buzz. Yeah, just the whole game we all play. You know?
Absolutely. Well, and even when I began, my teacher, one of the first things is like, okay, you need to get this set up. You need to lower your action. You're digging in way too much, and this is just going to be a problem. But anyway, looking ahead, what's in the works for the future, Josh?
Well, I'm going to ride this Buckford thing where it goes, as for one thing. Secondly, I think once I get my home, I was a fire victim, and I've been living with family for a couple of years, and I'm going to be moving into my property around Christmas time. Once I get my studio set up, I'd like to combine my three instruments, the electric bass, the stand-up bass, and the acoustic guitar, and start composing and doing more interesting stuff like I was. There's stuff on my website that kind of reflects that here and there. And maybe do that duo I was talking about with the stand-up bass and the piano. And I want to continue work on my YouTube channel, continue my education. I've been mostly done videos where I just play the bass line, and there's the tablature. The transcription is there with the notes and the tablature going by. I found out how to highlight as it goes now. Someone taught me how to do that, so you may see some improvements on my YouTube channel. Plus, I want to do some more of this type of videos where I'm talking and you can see me, and just discussing some concepts maybe, and then of course I want to continue to develop my bass fishing.
Oh, there you go. Well, let's come back to the bass fishing. If people want to find your stuff, your website, joshneedleman.net.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, and there's a lot of different pages on there, and I have a lot of online students. Since the pandemic, I've got that really dialed in, so
nice.
You can study from anywhere. I have a guy from South Africa, Adrian. I've got a guy in New Hampshire, Ben. I've got a guy in Canada. I mean, it's neat, and I have developed really good relationships and friendships with these guys, and I have a little setup that I have everybody get on their end, and I can send them. So I'll send them a little thing of me playing, and I'll watch them play back to it. So very little is lost. So yeah, so I have a lot of online lessons. You can inquire and get a 15-minute consultation there. I'm pretty busy, but we can try. Anybody that really wants to study with me, I try to make it myself available if they're willing to work with my schedule and work their way in. That's kind of how it's always been for a long time.
There you go. Well, busy is good. So you want to be busy, but you want to do the other things too. And I know you're also pretty busy on social media. So Facebook, Instagram, a lot of it'll be like at Josh Needleman Bass or Bass, depending about the fish. Josh Needleman 1 on Instagram and Josh Needleman on Twitter. So we should be able to find you pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
And before we end, of course, it's always, I think a lot of people think of bass players as one-dimensional individuals that only do one thing. And that is so wrong, because everybody I talk to does so many other things while they're at it. And one of your passions is bass fishing. Tell us a little bit about this hobby, this passion that you have that is so far away from bass, other than the fact that it is spelled the same. I
actually have the Bassin Bassist YouTube reserved. The Bassin Bassist. I was thinking combining the two. I had before the fire, I had all the equipment.
Oh,
I was
wow.
gonna like give a lesson on the boat and then give a bass fishing lesson. But it's sort of been a fun little quirky angle. I think I still might try it.
There you
But
go.
anyway, I've always loved nature and I've always loved fantasy, Tolkien, things like that. You know, I'm like a Tolkien scholar. I don't speak Elvish or anything, but I know quite a bit. I've read Unfinished Tales and Children of Húrin and the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings and the appendix to the Lord of the Rings. By the way, that's the 5 that you need, people, if you really want to know how to. You can weed through the rest of it. That's all you need. Anyway, so and I just love the Dungeons and Dragons, things like that. When I was growing up too, I've always had a wild imagination, and so I was looking for something to do like 6 years ago, and somebody showed me some big bass pictures, and I'm like, well, there's some reservoirs around. I want to try that. And so I got a spinning rod, and it took me, I don't know, 4 months to catch a bass.
Oh, wow.
I finally caught one, and I was like, started watching YouTubes, and it said, put your boat here, put your boat there, this position, and to catch the fish. I'm like, I don't have a boat, so I got an inflatable. I kind of would blow that up on the on the ramp.
Yeah.
And go out in that for a while. I had a little trolling motor, electric motor with it. And then I got a small bass boat, and I joined a club, and I was a co-angler in the club. So there's somebody who's in the back of the boat. So a guy will have a boat, they call that the pro, and the guy in the back is the co. And so I became a champion co-angler. I became co-angler of the year for the Bass Nation Club Weekend League, and I got to go to the regionals at Mount Shasta, at the Shasta Lake, and I also had big fish in another league, and then I got a nice bass boat, and I've been competing in the Major League Fishing MLF Big 5 Qualifier League. For 3 years I did that, and now I'm in the Wild West Bass Trail Qualifier League. So I'm just trying to make my way up in the sport. I'm dedicated to it. What I love about it is they cut you loose at 8 in the morning, or at earlier for 8 hours. And you have maps, and you have treasure, and you have mystery. You're trying to locate this moving treasure.
Yeah.
Nobody dies. Very rarely do the fish die. You let them go. I don't know if you know anything about pro bass fishing, but we use all artificial lures, and there's no trolling allowed. It's very skill oriented, and you have to figure out what the fish want, when, and crack the puzzle every day, every hour. So, and sometimes I'm better at it than others, but I love it, and I wish I had the skills in bass fishing that I have from base. I'm hoping that they'll catch up one day.
There you go.
Anyway, it keeps me active, and half of the reason I'm out there is just for the beauty and the serene calm of the morning, and the other is the competition. I like the competition and the cracking the code, the competition against myself, against my abilities, and the cognitive, and the precision of the casting and things. If people are curious about what it's all about, you should check out Bassmasters or Major League Fishing. You can watch unedited. It might seem boring. It's kind of like golf, but you can watch. On the best anglers of each day in those leagues, they put a cameraman on their boat.
Gotcha.
You get to kind of watch what they do, and it can be really exciting. So.
Well, and as an amateur, if I remember correctly, my dad always wanted to catch bass because they gave him a good fight as compared to some fish, and it was the same challenge, and we did kind of the same thing: inflatable boat, and a better boat, and so forth and so forth. But I digress. Josh, so great getting caught up with you. So exciting, all the bass news. Folks, if you want to learn bass with Josh, now you know how to do it. Check out Getting Around the Bass. Get your own textbook at home. Folks, you've seen him here. Josh Needleman coming to you live on Bass Musician Magazine.
Thanks, Raul. I really enjoyed this.